Hey, this is Shaun with the Atlanta Tennis Podcast, powered by Go Tennis. Check out our calendar of Metro Atlanta tennis events at letsgotennis.com. And if you know Bike Friendly Atlanta, go to bikefriendlyatl.org. Check them out, like and subscribe on social media. Also, we want to hear your story on our podcast. We want to make it your podcast. So if you have a story to share, mine's the tweener in the city finals, and it was amazing. And I lost, so I get no credit for that, by the way, but it's a fun story to tell. You've got a story to share. We want to hear it. We want to share it with Atlanta. Go to letsgotennis.com/my story. You might have your story featured on the Atlanta Tennis Podcast. Today, this is the ultimate guide to getting your kids started playing tennis. And Dave, I realize when we named this thing, this is anybody starting to play tennis. Last week, we talked about finding the actual coach. How do you find them? How do you vet them? Where are these people, these magic people that can teach tennis? But what we're going to talk about today, we're discussing the most important thing you need, potentially, after finding a coach, is a court. You need a tennis court. You need a court to play tennis. So does the coach have access to a court? Do you have courts in your neighborhood, in Atlanta, in the Southeast especially? A lot of neighborhood courts that we have access to. Sometimes you're allowed to bring a coach, sometimes you're not. You'll want to check on that. But also public facilities. Dave, you've got experience at public facilities, and I have experience, maybe we both do, working at a private club and knowing, okay, I can spend lots of money to have access to courts whenever I want, if I can afford it. So public courts, sometimes there's a charge, sometimes there are all kinds of different ways. And we've come up with maybe 4 different ways you can find a court. But where do we want to begin talking about this? We've already talked about where the coach is found or how the coach is found. Shameless plug, letsgotennis.com/coach_finder. We do have a coach finder. Maybe we need a court finder. How do we do this, Dave?
Yeah, I think Shaun, part number one goes back to your vetting process. You know, when you're talking to the coach, no matter how you found him, I think part of your vetting process is right there. And that is, if you don't know much, and most of your beginner, intermediate people don't know so much about their court situation because they don't think about it. And I get it. That's okay. I think asking the coach, do you have courts or you have access to courts? That coach right there is going to tell you right off the bat whether they're really in the industry or not. If they're trying to make a few cheap dollars on the side, they're not going to know. They're not going to know, the thing that I get asked all the time is, when they say, do you have courts? The first thing I ask them is, number one, do you live in a subdivision? Because around Atlanta, that is very common. And number two, does that subdivision have a contract with a coach or a group of an organization that has a contract on the courts? If they do, I can't go there. That's my professional etiquette toward other teaching pros. And that right there tells you whether you're vetting them really easy by doing that. It helps you to know they are in the industry. They're not just a fly-by-night kind of guy like we talked about. So, I know all the public courts around me. I can tell you the situations, the one I teach on, the one that are down the street, and what they cost $5 to $7 an hour. Do I incorporate that in my cost or not? That's up to the individual pro, depending on what they charge. They can have the charge already built in, and you just don't tell them that. And that's up to the pro. But that conversation needs to happen early while you're vetting. You need to ask that question alongside that. That helps your vetting process, but also lets you know where it stands. Do you need to pay another $5 or $10 for the court or not? And so that should help you vet and find out all at the same time. Your public court's generally going to charge. The thing that I also tell in my public court places is, if I'm calling them up, like E.E. Robbins or even old Mountain Park, things like that, the first thing I'm going to tell them when I'm booking a court is, I am a teaching pro. I'm going to be teaching on this court. I have a bucket of balls. Don't book match play beside me. And so I know when I book it, I'm going to ask them, if they say, you're going to be on court 6, I'm going to say, well, who's on court 5? So to make sure if they're in blocks of 2, or batteries of 2 is what we call them, I want to make sure that I'm the first one to reserve and they don't put a match beside me after I booked. And so I'm very careful, and that should help your vetting process. If that coach doesn't have a hill of beans about courts and stuff, that's a risky play. Because if I show up and Shaun is out there playing a match and I'm going to walk on the court beside him, I'm going to ask the person who's in charge of those courts, I told you not to book a match here. I'm going to take my court anyway, but they're not going to be happy. Because, you can only keep balls on your court for so long, And so, I even know things like, I know when I was at Mountain Park, because I taught on court, that was 1, 2, 3, and 4, which there was 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, then 5 and 6 were over here. I knew that if they booked me on court, that would be 4. That was 1, 2, then 3 and 4. They put me on 4. The balls hit the fences and went toward that corner. So that helped me. So if somebody wanted to play over there on this other court, that was actually a little bit more tolerable because their balls would come on my court more, and that was okay.
Well, we can, as experienced coaches, we can also set up a lesson plan based on hitting balls toward
Absolutely.
the corner, toward the fence. We can do all that.
Right.
But you'll get to know that if it potentially in that first phone call. Say, okay, hey, tennis coach, Joe Tennis Pro, where are we going to play? I want my kid to play tennis. If you have access to your own courts, that's usually pretty easy, but you still have the same questions to ask. Do you have a court reservation system in your neighborhood?
Right.
Do they allow any tennis coach to come in? Right. Now, similar to what you're saying, Dave, there are some neighborhoods, the larger ones with more than 6 courts typically, will often have a coach there who is on staff essentially.
Right.
Running that program, which in that case will be like a public park or a private facility. You have to treat it that way. You then need permission. So I'm not going to go into a Windermere where Bobby Schindler is, and you're going to call me up and say, hey, Shaun, I want a lesson. I'm going to do it at Windermere. I'm going to already know I can't do that. I'm sorry.
That's right.
We get a phone call from Chateau Elan. Hey, can you come teach a tennis lesson? No, I can't, but I can put you in touch with their tennis program.
Right.
So there are certain things the coaches are going to share about what their understanding is of the industry, because all of us at some point have had to walk out on the courts and kick a coach out that didn't belong there and look at that coach and say, I can assume you're not certified because this is certified tennis coach 101.
Right.
From an etiquette point of view.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, life etiquette. Life etiquette.
Enough said, right?
Life etiquette is not what life etiquette used to be.
Yep.
It's almost gotten to a point where whatever I can get away with is what I get away with.
Right. And that makes me think of the HOA conversations we've been having recently, which probably needs to be its own discussion.
Sure.
Because from a public court point of view, give me an example, Dave. You say you can call up one public park where they don't have a specific coach running the program, book the court, teach a lesson, and either you pay the fee or sometimes it's free.
Yeah, I know a lot of the Gwinnett parks, which is run by Gwinnett County Parks and Rec, and they're all over the county. When they have an attendant there, what they started doing, this has got to be maybe a decade ago or even more, they started basically charging each pro $100 a year to be able to teach on their court. And that was kind of like a business lease or whatever for a year. And so, it wasn't a large amount of money. If you did enough teaching, you were going to recoup that with no problem.
No, you're serious.
Exactly right. And so then if somebody called up, they would say, oh, well, Shaun teaches here and Dave teaches here. And they would throw your names and numbers out there. Then it was up to them to call you. And that was a good thing. But, and so then I would call them up and I say, Shaun was the attendant. I say, hey, Shaun, I want to do a lesson on court, 4. Is it open? And is 5 booked? And they would say, no, 4 and 5 are not booked. And I say, okay, put me on 4 and try to not schedule a T2 match or something like that next to it. And they would put on there like Dave teaching. And that would signify bucket of balls. Right. They would never put somebody with another bucket of balls next to a bucket of balls. And that's good because it helps people get along a lot better.
Yep.
Whether you think you can control those magnetized balls or not, sorry, you can't. And so that's, I go through that kind of stuff a lot. Been doing it for 30 years, and that's just good etiquette. There's like last night I was teaching, and there was a court. I had 2 courts reserved. We have a battery of 4 courts in a row. And so people on the first 2 courts, well, one guy comes out on court one, he's teaching with a bucket. Then another guy rolls out one of those little bitty portable ball machines on court 2. And I'm like, dude, you're going to cause a lot of havoc. Oh, well, I can control the balls. I said, no, I don't think you can. You might be hitting every cone right on that court in that one corner. But when it hits that fence, it's all bets are off. Mm-hmm. That ball goes left, right, up, down, all over the place. And sure enough, wasn't 5-10 minutes, all of a sudden he's starting to just hit forehands, to one side or something. And it helped, but it's still, his balls were all over the place. And then these ladies wanted to come out on the court next to me. And I said, let me tell you, I've got beginner intermediate kids. They're older, 13, 14 years old. Their balls are going all over these 2 courts. They're not going, and it's going to be like a mortar attack. And they're like, oh, well, we'll be okay. I said, no, you're not going to play there because I'm keeping you safe. Well, we appreciate it, but we'll take our chances. I said, no, because it's a liability now. And they just looked at me like I was being a mean guy, but I'm actually trying to keep a safe environment. And I was very unsafe by letting the ball with the ball machine on court 2. He's right next to somebody that's another bucket.
Right.
That's just not courteous in my mind.
Right.
But people
at that specific facility, am I allowed as a coach to book a court there, or I can't because you're tasked with teaching at that facility, correct?
Yeah, that class I was teaching was a class for that facility. Okay. That's the only thing. They have 2 things that can book there. One of the classes that are taught for there that makes money for the city. And 2 are the outer teams that play out of there. They get 1 practice night, then they play on whatever day that is, and that's it. The high school, they come in during high school season. They have the top 8 courts. We get the bottom 4 while they're there, and it gets to be very busy. Like last night, people are looking for courts, and that's what these 2 ladies came down. The upper 8 courts were taken because they had a match going on. Yeah. And until that match ends, the only courts open is this one down here with all these bombs landing on it.
Right. and that runs me toward next is, okay, so not just in Atlanta, throughout the country, anywhere else, you've got to probably more often than not find that kind of public facility. USTA claims that 70% of tennis is played on public parks. I don't think that's true in Atlanta specifically. I bet that number is lower. Yeah. But that's Atlanta specific. Now, if we're talking Nashville, it might be similar to Atlanta because the culture's similar. There are going to be some neighborhoods with outdoor courts. But as you move north and you move west,
it's public. Yeah.
North, it gets colder. It's either going to be public or private. Good chance you don't have courts in your neighborhood. Right. So the coach is going to be tasked with helping you find that court if you don't have it. Right. Now, make sure that court, just kind of wrapping it up here, make sure that coach knows what they're doing. If they don't have access to a court, they can go out and start making some phone calls. You could make some phone calls, but typically the beginner parents that I have call me up and they have all the worst ideas. Sure. Well, let's just sneak onto our neighbor's court. No, can't do that. Let's go onto this public court over here. I'm like, no, we're not allowed to do that. What about Chateau Elan? They got courts. That's a private club. Right. So that is that struggle of a search for a court. So can we help in some way and say, you know what, I'll give an interesting thing. I found a website years ago. Don't know who runs it. I have no vested interest in this. Right. I think it's called tennismaps.com.
What shocked me?
And I think it has more than, I want to say 2,700 tennis court facilities just in the metro Atlanta area. Right. Just look at it. Just look at that and say, you know what? There's some courts here. Now, find out about those courts. Yeah. If you don't know, don't just show up. Right. Don't just show up. But also, if you're in the area, I'll use Chateau Elan again as an example. Sure. Their membership is like $50 a month. It's nothing. Right. It's nothing. And in that case, you got access to coaches, you got access to courts, but it doesn't mean you're going to go to a TPC Sugarloaf where it's going to be more like $50,000 a year. Some of those things are unaffordable for most people. In New Jersey, I would guess a lot of those indoor facilities, are you paying $20, $30, $40 an hour just for do you also have to be a member? Right.
Yeah.
So the rest of the world thinks tennis is expensive.
Yeah.
In Atlanta, it's pretty much free. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say what, $5 to $7, Dave, at many public facilities. If I'm
public facility, that's about what it is. Yeah.
And at least 600 neighborhoods. I use Reserve My Court's numbers because we're partnered with Reserve My Court. They've got 600 facilities, most of which are in Atlanta. Call it 500, maybe more in Atlanta.
Right.
And those are neighborhood facilities that I can go out my door and walk up to the courts and play tennis for free.
Oh, yeah.
Lessons aren't free. I get that.
Right.
Practice is free.
That's right.
And if you have access to a backboard or a wall, that makes that court invaluable.
That's right.
If you can find a public facility with a giant wall, you know what? Go to your public park if it's dirt and a side of a building.
That's right.
Find a tennis court and you want to take your kids to hit some tennis balls. I watched a kid kicking a soccer ball up against the side of a building at one point. Like, that's fantastic.
Yep.
Absolutely fantastic. If you can't find a court, just do whatever you can do. Don't step on anybody else's toes. Don't walk into a private facility unannounced. Get your permission. And I think you're right, Dave. I think that really does help you vet the coach in that.
Absolutely. You know, the last but not least, a lot of times what I do, Shaun, is I pull up Google Maps and go into an area where I'm at. You know, when you pull up Google Maps, your dot's right there. Just expand it out and look for the tennis courts are easy to see. You just got to move around a little bit, and 5-10 minutes, you're gonna find some courts. Now, tap on it, get their number if there's a number for it, and call it and see what goes. That's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Google Maps, love it. Start there. Dave Matthews, the ultimate guide to getting your kids started to play tennis. We'll see you again next week. Thank you, sir.
You bet, Shaun. Have a good day.